Good morning, everybody. We can direct our attention this way. I know, sorry for the late start. We had to have a quick little powwow. We have important stuff going on this week in the congregation. If you don't mind, we're going to start with the word of prayer, and then we'll get into our Bible class. Thank you, Lord, for this day. Thank you for being with us. I ask you to allow us to open our hearts and our minds and to be able to read your word and comprehend it and insert it in our souls so that way we can go out in this world and show it to everybody else and to be good examples and live the life that you expect us to live. Thank you for everybody that is here, and please be also with everybody who's not here. And help us to be an encouragement to them, and help us to continue to look out for everybody who's not here and who needs to know more about you, Lord. Thank you for all your love. In the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. If we want to open our Bibles up to the book of Jonah, we'll be studying Jonah. We're going to get as far into Jonah as we possibly can today. And I normally like to give a little background on how I kind of choose what I'm about to teach or try to teach. Is while you guys are getting there to Jonah, I always felt like my Old Testament is kind of weak. Like that's something I need to strengthen. And we're kind of coming towards the near end of us men kind of teaching and preaching. So I was trying to strengthen one of my weaknesses with this. So this is one of my weaknesses, but I'm going to do my best. My Old Testament's not as good as New. I've always studied the New Testament a lot more since I became a Christian. And then one day I was just flipping through my Bible at work. I have a little Bible at work, and it happened to stop there. It's a small little 4-chapter book. I read it the whole thing, kind of skimmed through it. And then in between little pauses at work, I read chapter 1, and I was like, man, there's a lot there. And then I read chapter 2, and I'm like, whoa, there's a lot there too. And I just kind of kept with it. So we're going to start in Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, starting with 1 and 2. I'm reading out of the New King James. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise and go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. Right here we have what I call the command. God gave a command to Jonah. Now if we try to put ourselves in Jonah's shoes, and we are commanded to do certain things, we have a whole Bible here full of commandments on how to live our life. Jonah was just given one command at the time. But I wanted to, ever since when I met Nancy and then we started studying the Bible, she gave me this acronym. I'm pretty sure all of you guys know it. But the Bible is basic instructions before leaving earth. And I kind of live by that. There's two things that I'm going to say in this class that I kind of live by that. That, and then you guys will hear later on the other one. Let's look at a couple of just commands that we get from Jesus. Let's turn our Bibles to Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 through 40. Matthew 22, 34 through 40. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. The one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him and saying, Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said to him, You shall love your Lord your God with your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like, You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now when you hear love your neighbor, what do you guys think? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? None? Kindness. Anything else? Caring, I guess, goes with kindness. How many times just this week alone, have we interacted with other people in the congregation to check up on them? Jimmy's not here, but I know he'd probably be okay with using him as an example. His dad passed away. A lot of us went and supported him at the viewing. That was so nice to see when I was there. I was like, man, this is awesome. But how many of us checked on him? That's very, very important. Doing favors for other people without being asked to. Sometimes we wait to be summoned to. How about we take the initiative and take the first step? If you see, this is just random, but if you see somebody struggling, at a grocery store, or sometimes I see a lot of older ladies trying to carry big bags of dog food because, you get a bigger bang for your buck in a big bag. Or sometimes cases of water. I see this a lot at Costco or at Sam's. How many of us have seen it and stepped in and offered to help? When it says to love our neighbor, does it mean just the people here inside this room? We need to open our minds and not be tunnel visioned. I grew up around horses, race horses, and you put blinders on race horses so they don't see what's next to them, so they can stay focused, tunnel vision. We need to take our blinders off and be able to see everything around us and how we can help everybody around us. How about love God with all your heart? What's the first thing that comes to mind? The first thing that comes to my mind is prioritizing His works over my personal hobbies. Granted, I don't have very many hobbies. I don't have very many things to do. I'm not out there a lot. I have work, family, and then God. God comes first, but essentially my time is consumed by those three things. I don't know if other people have other hobbies. I had one, I guess. I used to follow sports a lot. I don't really follow them as much. Figuring out what our talents are and using them. How many of us have actually taken some time to try to figure out what our talents are and actually using them to benefit the congregation or people around us? Yeah. Prioritizing Him. Thank you. Anybody else? Now, as we look at these, just these two commandments, and we look back at let's just say the last 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, this last year, since we're nearing towards the end of the year, how obedient have we been? Have we been living the life that we're instructed to live through the Bible? I mean, I know I probably haven't done as good as I should have done. I wish I could say I could have done better. Because as I was doing this study, I was looking back and my mind was kind of swirling around. I was like, well, I could have done this. I could have done this. I could have prioritized maybe working for God more and requested more Sundays off of work. But I didn't. Maybe I started to think of a lot more things I could have done that I'm going to try to insert that in my life moving forward. Now let's look at Jonah chapter 1 verse 3. But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. What did Jonah do with God's commands? Pretty obvious. He fled. He left. He left as far as he possibly could go. Is that what we did? When we get taught the Bible and we get taught what to do we flee from it or do we go into it? You can't be lukewarm. We've discussed that before on our lesson on zeal. Are you in or are you out? Are you fleeing or are you running towards God? Which one are you? And as I look and I started to see, like, what does Jonah think he's doing? Why did he just go away? Why just not go to Nineveh? And granted, it's probably not, it's the way I see it, and I live in Oklahoma for all our visitors. I'm in Okie, all right? And the first time I went to St. Louis, left me with no desire to go back to St. Louis. Sorry if that's your guys' but I was doing a job one time. It happened to me 3 times. I've had a gun pulled out on me 3 times. Or shown at me, one time actually pointed at me. Working. This is during pure daylight. Not even at nighttime. So I can see, this is what I feel like God was telling Jonah, go to the north side or King's Highway or whatever that one, I forgot where it was, and preach the word. And I'm like, yeah, right, not me. You mean me in there? But that's what I envisioned. I've said this before, I'm not very smart when it comes to reading. I have to paint pictures in my head as I'm reading for me to kind of understand what's going on. I read it 3 or 4 times and I make a little story in my head, and that's how I kind of follow along. And I just picture like a little cartoon, God telling Jonah, go, and then I just envisioned, the first thing I thought of was St. Louis. And like, there was a guy one time pulled out a gun. I'm like, what you looking at? And I was like, oh man, no. You know, like that's not me. You know, but continuing on. But why would Jonah flee? What are some things that he felt? Like when I felt when I go to St. Louis. I feel a little scared sometimes. I won't be honest. I'll be honest. There's a few times where I'm like, man, I got to go through there again. He felt maybe insecure, felt like he was not good enough to go and teach and preach the word. He would rather do other stuff. He just didn't feel like it. I mean, how many of us feel like that sometimes? We'd rather be somewhere else. Yeah, that's a good one. Really, that's really hard to overcome. I've learned that's really hard to overcome. Yes, Jerry? Yeah, he may not. Go ahead, take a seat. Come on in. Yeah, that's a big one. He may not like those people, but what are we commanded to? We heard real quick, we must love our neighbor. So sometimes we have to put our personal feelings to the side. Maybe he does not have a good support team. Fleeing from God, just like Jonah did, running away also, does that mean, it just doesn't mean fleeing from one command. It means fleeing from a lifestyle, from living the life that God wants us to live. Sometimes it can be a little tough, you know, trying to live up to a certain expectation, but are we doing our best to live up to it? What are we doing to kind of help us to get to where we want to be? And I want to ask you now, have you ever fled from God's commands? And I want to know, the question is why? And you don't have to answer that out loud. Let's just keep that in our heads. Why have we fled from God's commands? Or why would Jonah do it? Does he think we can hide from God? That's one thing that really came to my mind, because when he went into the boat and kind of hid, you know, when we're going to read that part next, and I felt like he was hiding, you know, like I do these little cartoons or little movies in my head just to help me comprehend. But now let's go to Hebrews chapter 4, verse 13. And there is no creature hidden. Oh, I'll let you get there. Hebrews 4:13. This is some of this constructive criticism I get from my wife. She tells me to slow down when I'm doing Bible verses. Hebrews 4:13. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. What this tells me is that God is always looking at us. No matter where we try to go, we cannot hide from him or keep secrets from him. I knew in my journey, when I first kind of started to become a Christian, you know, in my past, I know some of you guys know, but I used to drink and do a lot of bad things, whatever. I'm not going to get into detail, don't want to take up too much time on that. But when I first started to kind of go on my walk, I used to like drink one beer and be like, he won't. You know, I really thought like I felt like I can hide from him. Like, he's not going to notice if I did one. And then the more I started to study, I'm like, man, I can't hide nothing from him. I have to live righteously the whole time. It's like a 24/7 deal. You just can't be like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It's not the hokey pokey. It's what I call it. You can't be 1 in, 1 out. You have to be fully committed to this. My next question is, who helps us overcome all these things that we talked about earlier? Out of our comfort zone. You know, feeling like we're not good enough. All the things that we listed before. All the things for why we flee. Who's going to help us overcome all that? Let's go to Isaiah chapter 41, verse 13. Isaiah 41:13. For I, the Lord your God, will hold your right hand, saying to you, fear not, I will help you. This is telling me that God is always going to be with us. He's going to be the person that helps us overcome whatever it is that we're struggling with or why we're fleeing. Whether it's because we're scared, out of our comfort zone, don't like the people, whatever the reason may be, X, Y, and Z. But we're running away from the same person that's going to help us overcome that. Doesn't that feel kind of weird? Like, well, the first time I said it in my head, that sounded kind of weird. I'm running away from the person that's going to help me overcome that. Why? Sometimes we feel like we can just, like he's not watching, or we expect him to help us but not do our part. I've always said that a relationship with God's a two-way street. He gives, but yet we don't give back. A lot of people say relationships are 50%, but they're not. They're 100 and 100. Yes, Ben?
We tend to have a rebellious nature until we're more educated, until we either educate ourselves or just learn it from maybe our relatives. I think we tend to have a rebellious nature.
Yeah, I would say that. I think it's naturally that when you get these feelings in you to automatically rebel, I guess. I was getting ready to lead into something like that. Our minds trickle us. Whenever we come to hard times, instead of leaning on God, our mind trickles somewhere. Now let's go to Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. Proverbs 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understandings. I feel like Jonah or us sometimes, whenever we don't obey God, we kind of lean on what we think is correct. Sometimes we say, well, I don't feel like doing this. I don't do this. I don't feel good doing this. That I. Instead of focusing on what God wants. Instead of focusing on how I can serve God, we think about me. And then, who referenced the song? I remembered somebody, I forgot who was preaching and said that song by Toby Keith, me. I forgot who it was. I thought of that sermon again. I was like, yeah, that's naturally us as human beings. It's easy to think about me, I, instead of thinking of what's best for everybody else around me. And then I think about the verse Philippians, I think it's 2:13. Robert used it, Dan used it, and then Steve used it. I think it's 2:13, where it was how we do not need to think about ourselves, but think of everybody else. Put everybody else first. Something along those lines. My memorization is not good at all. But when we go back to Proverbs 3:5 and not lean on our own understanding, what does that tell you? Whose understanding do we need to lean on? What it says in the beginning, trust in the Lord. And here's the next part that I picked up on. Basic instructions of before leaving earth and WWJD. I'm sure everybody's heard of that here, right? Yes? Who has not heard of that? Because it's very, I use it all the time. What would Jesus do? Whenever we get in situations where we don't know what to do and they're tough, and you start to automatically think me, you need to change it to WWJD. And that's really what helped me when I first started my walk in Christ, to stay focused with him. What would Jesus do? And there's been times at work where things get a little, strenuous. I work in construction, don't work around godly people, unfortunately. And as much as I try to insert it, they take it right back out of me. They fight back. Right now I'm going through tensions with a new guy we hired. We just keep bumping heads. He's an older feller. I try to teach him because, he comes from a different line of, we're both crane operators, but I run hydraulics, he runs crawlers, the ones with the tracks. He's like, I've been operating cranes since you've been in diapers. What are you going to teach me? Yada, yada, this. And then he'll ask me for help because he doesn't know, because these cranes are new and they got more computers, more. He's like, what button do I push here? I'm like, well, I thought you knew everything, And then I have to stop and be like, that's not what Jesus expects of me. And I climb up and I help him. You got to push this. You have to set I know you guys, I'm going to say some language you guys probably, you have to set your outrigger, set this, and then you can start operating. Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Well, duh, if you would just let me explain to you, you would get it. But I have to remind myself, what would Jesus do in that situation? And that will help me focus and put in my mind to take my thoughts out and bring Jesus' thoughts in. We have to remember to be like Jesus in this world. He is our example of how to be. And then I started this, and I asked this question because Nancy was like, oh, what are you going to teach about it? Nancy's my wife, if you guys don't know, she's right there. She's like, what are you going to teach about? I was like, I'm going to do Jonah. She's like, yeah? And then I was like, you know how, and I was talking just small conversation just at the kid, she was cooking and I showed up from work. I was like, you know how Jonah fled? And you know all this? I was like, what if Jesus would have fled from the cross? We would have been in big trouble, wouldn't we? But even then, he stayed focused on what God commanded him to do, our Father. And look at the great sacrifice he did. That's not like going to St. Louis and preaching. I mean, he went to the cross for us. And if he can do that, what's stopping us from obeying all his commands? I mean, I thought about that hard all day. What if Jesus would have fled from the cross? And I almost put all my focus in that. And I was like, no, I got to focus on Jonah. Focus on Jonah. But just, if you guys don't mind, just think about that as you guys are going through this week. What if Jesus would have fled from the cross? Where would we be right now? Not probably in a very good position. I'd hate to even imagine where we would be. But we'll keep moving on. Jonah 1:4. But the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship was about to be broken up. When we lean on our own understandings, sometimes, what does God do? What did God do to Jonah? In the very beginning of verse 4, it says, but the Lord. The Lord's plans always have a way of coming to light. They will always win. I'm gonna try to see how I don't have a good way of wording this. It's all this morning I've been thinking about how, do we think Jonah right now is about to go through a storm? And a lot of us might be going through a storm right now or have gone through a storm in the past. How many of those storms that we go through in life, tough moments in life, what I refer to as a storm, were self-inflicted? If we look at Jonah, he had a direct command of what to do. But the reason he is going through this storm in verse 4 was self-inflicted. Now let's look back at us. And let's take a look back, like I said. Let's try to envision the last month, 2 months, however back you want to go, your choice. Let's look at some of our storms. And were some of those self-inflicted? I'm not saying, that if you're going through a hard time, I'm not saying it was all your fault. Yeah. I'm going to get to that. But some of this sometimes can be a little self-inflicted. And then I thought of this family. Me and Nancy used to give Bible classes to this family. I think we've talked about them before. It was a Hispanic guy and an American lady. He didn't know English, she didn't know Spanish. How they got married and had kids, don't know. It was kind of awkward because I met him at the Hispanic congregation. And then when we left the Hispanic congregation, one day they randomly showed up at a English-speaking congregation when we left the Hispanic congregation. We were like, whoa, hey, we remember you. So I used to be off on Mondays. This is when I took a break from traveling and took a kind of pay cut to be home. It was right after me and Nancy got married. I was trying to be home, whatever. So we were having studies every Monday night. And then they started coming to church. And then they were talking how happy they were, everything was going good, and then they stopped coming. And then in a couple months or so, I'd get a phone call or a text, and they'd randomly show up to church and be like, can we please go through the Bible studies again? I think I want to leave his name. I don't want to say his name, because he's drinking again, he's doing this again. All of a sudden, another storm comes in. Then they come back to church, and everything gets better, for 4 or 5 months, I forget. This was a continuous cycle. And here goes the cycle again and again. And one time on a Monday night, I'll call him Marcos, just to give him a fake name. That's not his real name. He came up to me, because we would eat dinner at our house, and it was during the summer, and I was outside grilling. He's like, I want to ask you something. And he comes from a Catholic background, just like I did. And I don't know if it had something to do with it, because a lot of Catholics, at least from my personal opinion, or not opinion, experience, they're not very, I was a very, very loosey Catholic when I was a kid. I would go to, on Christmas, if you were lucky. He's like, how come whenever I leave the church, God stops loving me? I'm like, no, he doesn't stop loving you. You may be going through this storm because he's trying to get your attention to come back to him. And I feel like I said, I kind of go through these little movies in my head. I feel like he's grabbing my shoulders. This is how I explained it to him. I was like, when I go through my storms, I feel like he's just grabbing me, shaking me like, wake up, come back. So sometimes we may be going through something difficult, but that's just, I think, because he's trying to get to our attention to come back to him. Here's speaking on Jonah's situation or on Marcos' situation, because they would always come back. And then they'd come back and they'd be as happy as can be. And then something happened more on a personal level between us, and they stopped talking to us. Some people know kind of what happened, but yeah. But then if we continue to Jonah verses 5 through 12, Jonah chapter 1 verses 5 through 12. Then the mariners were afraid, and every man cried out to his God, and threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to line the load. But Jonah had gone down into the lowest parts of the ship, had laid down, and was fast asleep. So the captain came to him and said to him, "What do you mean, sleeper? Arise, call on your God. Perhaps your God will consider us, so that he may not perish." And they said to one another, "Come, let us cast out lots, that we may know for whose cause this trouble has come upon us." So they cast out lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, "Please tell us, for what cause is this trouble upon us? What is your occupation, and where do you come from? What is your country, and what people are you?" So he said to them, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "Why have you done this?" For the man knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Then they said to him, "What shall we do to you? The sea may be calm for us, for the sea was growing up tempestuous." And he said to them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and the sea will become calm for you, for I know that this great tempest is because of me." The last verse. Let me read that again, the last part. "For I know this great tempest is because of me." As we are going through this, and we sometimes go through storms, we start to try to think of excuses of why it's happening to us. Well, this person did this to me, this happened to me, this is, whatever may be the case, so on. And what Jonah is teaching me here is, sometimes I just need to look in the mirror and be like, "Esteban, it was you. You were the problem." Just like Jonah here said, "I am the problem. Throw me off the ship. I'm the problem." Sometimes we need to be self-conscious. Instead of pointing the finger outwards, point it inwards. And I've caught myself with that. I started to look back, like I said, 2-3 months, whatever, and some of the things that probably didn't go like I hoped they would go. I was like, well, maybe if I would have been a little nicer to some people, I would have, talking relationship-wise. At work, sometimes there's been some friction at work right now. And I started to look back, well, maybe if I wasn't so direct or so harsh, things wouldn't have been so bad. Maybe I should have been a little bit more loving. Maybe I should have been more caring, or whatever the case may be. I just started looking at my personal storms that I kind of went through, because we all go through them. It's inevitable. We're all going to go through them. Now if we keep going to Jonah chapter 13 through 17, through the end of chapter 1. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to return to land, but they could not, for the sea continued to grow more tempestuous against them. Therefore they cried out to the Lord and said, "We pray, O Lord, please do not let us perish this man's life, and do not charge us with innocent blood for you. O Lord, have done as pleases you." So they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared of the Lord exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and took vows. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Before I get into chapter 2, chapter 1 finishes off with the big fish. And I just ask myself, because like I told you guys, I'm envisioning this cartoon or this movie in my head. I see a big fish. Jonah gets swallowed into it. We recently finished watching the movie Finding Nemo. And there was the part where the sharks follow Nemo's dad and the bluefish. And he opened his mouth trying to bite him. And I don't know why I thought of this, but it's really dark in there. Really, really dark. What's the reasoning behind a big fish swallowing Jonah? I'm going to continue to go into chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. It's the whole chapter 2. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the fish's belly and said, I cried out to the Lord because of my affliction, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried out, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surround me. And your billows and your waves passed over me. Then I said, I have been cast out of your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The waters surrounded me even to my soul. The deep closed around me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. I went down to the mooring of the mountains. The earth with its bar closed behind me forever. Yet you have brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer went up to you into your holy temple. Those who regard worthless idols forsake their own mercy, but I will sacrifice to you with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay what I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. So the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. The fish gave us a dark place to do what? Gave Jonah what? An opportunity to pray. An opportunity to call and talk to God and come back. That gave Jonah a very, very important little one-on-one time with God. Now let's go to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew 5, verses 5 through 7. Give you guys some time. Matthew chapter 5, verses 5 through 7. And when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in a secret place. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathens do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. That was the first scriptures I thought of when Jonah went into the fish. Sometimes and it's nothing wrong with this, we come here and we try to get healings by being surrounded by all of us. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that's wrong. But I'm just saying sometimes when we're going through a deep storm, like Jonah is, we just need to lock ourselves up somewhere in a dark place, close your eyes, and go to the Lord. Nobody else can help us when we're going through a storm like Jonah is than going to the Lord. Where is your place of meditation? Do you guys have a personal little place that you guys go to for prayer? I have two that I do. When I'm driving to work, I know it's not a dark place because I'm in my truck, but that's where I feel at peace. I do a lot of driving and in the shower. Don't judge me, but that's just my place where I relax. But in the shower, I'm sorry, it's just what I do. When I'm in there, I'm by myself. Our light switch here in Washington where we live has got one little dimmy light and one is a little brighter. I just turn on the little dim where it's just barely enough light. And and Nancy sometimes will be like, what took you so long? I had to just in there, you know? But where is your private place where sometimes you just need to go to the God? And honestly, it's so relieving. Like while I was going through my little things at work, I went through a good little month or so of, it was just constant battles. I thought about quitting, moving back to Oklahoma. Luckily, this congregation's here because this is the main reason I'm still here. I really thought about leaving and going back to Oklahoma, but this congregation kept me here. The fact of work should be thankful of this congregation. They should. I was going through a really hard time, and my alone time with God really, really, really helped me prevail that little month of kind of just bumping heads. There was a lot of kind of change going on, but it all got fixed. I'm telling you, it happened kind of like, I don't even have a word for it. We were going through all this, and I was thinking about quitting, then all of a sudden the owners come in to see me, and they offered me a promotion. And I'm like, whoa, that's the last thing I kind of expected, you know? And I took it, you know, I start the new position January 1st. Should have started last month, but with work or whatever, they came back to see me again this week, and I start my new position January 1st. Hopefully it works out. If not, we'll see. But it all was by going to God by myself and just giving all my troubles to Him. He helped me overcome every single little battle that I have had. I don't know about you guys, but I can personally vouch for it. And now let's keep going and let's see how it helped Jonah. Jonah chapter 2, I'm going to read verse 4 again. Then I said, I have been cast out of your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The second part of that, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. He looked back at himself, said, I have messed up, went into this dark place, went to prayer, and said, Lord, I am back and I am yours. Are we humble enough, or I don't know what word to use, that's just the first word that kind of came to my head, to recognize when we're wrong, point the finger at us, go into our fish or into our room, go in a dark place, pray about it, and be like, Lord, thank you for everything you've done for me. Thank you for helping me overcome this. I am yours again. I'm sorry that I have not obeyed you. Here I am again. And that reminds me of the parable of the prodigal son. He will receive you with open arms as long as you're willing to come back to Him again. Now Jonah chapter 2 verse 10 again. So the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah on dry land. If we give ourselves back to the Lord, and we wholeheartedly give our heart and our souls to the Lord, He will put us back on dry land. It may not be instantly. It may not be as fast as we kind of wish it would happen. But He will put us back down the right path that we need to go down. Now if we go to Jonah chapter 3, I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. Well, we might get through 3 chapters. Hopefully we get all the way across. Jonah 3, 1 through 3. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that the great city, and preach it to the message that I tell you. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3-day journey in extent. As Jonah is vomited out of the mouth of the fish, what does he receive? A second chance. What does Jonah do with his second chance? He goes forward. What are we going to do when we receive a second chance. And then I put this kind of into perspective, into like a live, what can happen to us here. If we give a first bad impression, because Jonah didn't give a very first good impression as by fleeing. How many of us have been to a job interview? I think a lot of us have. I've been to a few, couple. In my line of work, I've only been interviewed twice, and I've worked at 6 different places. 5, I can't remember. I know they just call me, you want to come? I say yes or no, kind of deal. But how many of us have been in a job interview? A lot of us. If you give a bad first impression, they're probably not going to call you back. But guess what God does? He calls you back. He gives you that second opportunity. And if you get a second opportunity, let's just say a job interview that you probably fluked, like, man, I messed that one up, but you get the call back. What are you going to do with that second opportunity? Are you going to go a little bit more prepared to that job interview? Are you going to put a little bit of an extra huff in it? You're going to put a little bit more time into it? You're going to prepare a little more? You're going to be a little bit more proactive with it? So now what are we going to do with God's second opportunity? God gave Jonah a second chance. How many chances has God given us? Have we taken advantages of those chances? There's a lot of stuff going on right now. There's sign-up sheet. I don't know. I think I seen, like, when I walked in, I think I seen 3 or 4 clipboards in the foyer of sign-up sheets of things to do. How many of us have our names on them? How many of us are doing other little things? There's a lot of things. I saw on the bulletin that Brandy's doing an ornament thing. I'm not real sure how that is, but she is doing her part. How many of us have done? Yesterday we went to go see Logan and his play. All the teenagers did their part. They're like, oh yeah, we want to go see him, and not everybody can make it, but the ones that can make it made it. It was so awesome, so awesome. What are you doing with your second chance? Jonah chapter 3, verse 3. Here's what Jonah did. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3-day journey in extent. Oh wow, I read that again. Now one person, when he went to Nineveh, now let's look back at ourselves. We're pointing the fingers at us, but in a good way now. What did Jonah do to, am I saying it right, Nineveh? Or is it Nineveh? I can't remember. Doing fine. All right, sorry. My English is not very good. I'm not a very good reader. What happened to that town, to that community, that city, that whatever? They decided to obey. Now, if we put our second opportunity, or whatever opportunity, 3rd, 5th, 10th, into play, and actually follow God's commands, and let's pretend, I'll use St. Louis instead of Pacific. St. Louis is Nineveh. And we go into that dark place, but now wholeheartedly obeying God, not fearing nothing. What can happen to Pacific all the way to St. Louis? The same thing that happened to Nineveh. If we put our efforts into work, just like we're commanded to, and not be scared, not flee, not run away, and take advantage of whatever chance it is we've gotten, imagine the difference this community, this city, this county, whatever you want to do, imagine the difference there would be here. Every pew, and you wouldn't have enough places to sit everybody. Or are we taking advantage of our second chance, 3rd chance, 4th chance, 5th chance? Can we be like Jonah, where one person can make a difference and impact a lot of people? Are you that person? And the biggest part is, it took an imperfect person, somebody who was scared, somebody who fled, somebody who was just kind of timid, didn't want nothing to do with it. God will give us powers more than we can think of. God will help us overcome every little thing to where we can make a difference in just maybe 1, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 different people. But we have to be willing to obey, command, and like Laura said, get out of our comfort zone. Is that you today? And I won't continue because I think we're just about out of time, and I don't think I'll be able to finish the next point. Cool, so that is it for today. Hopefully next time I get to teach class, we can dive into chapter 4. Thank you, guys.